Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. This week has seen one of the most egregious attacks on the free press in our nation's history. The anchor for Press TV's English language news network, Marzieh Hashemi, a dual U.S.-Iranian citizen, was snatched from the St. Louis airport. Hashemi had been visiting family and was in the St. Louis area to film a documentary on the Black Lives Matter movement. She was transferred to a cell in Washington, D.C., where she is being held without charges. In addition, Ms. Hashemi, a practicing Muslim, was forced to remove her hijab and offered only pork and other non-halal products as food by her captors. This is the kind of thing you would expect from an outlaw state like Saudi Arabia, but we like to think it doesn't happen here. But it does. Here's Catherine Shakdam, a recent guest on this program and a personal friend of Ms. Hashemi, commenting on Marzieh Hashemi and her capture.
Marzieh is a really dear friend of mine, and I respect her tremendously. I mean, this woman, has been an inspiration to so many journalists, so many rights activists, because she has been, if anything, consistent in her belief. She has been very strong in standing, on issues such as democracy and human rights, and national sovereignty on principle. So not when it's just politically convenient, or when it pleases you intellectually, but on principle. So whether or not she agrees, for example, with certain government policies beyond the point, she would support their right to national sovereignty. She would support their right to political self-determination. She will criticize, until she's blue in the face when she feels that certain regimes, for example, are violating communities or individuals' human rights. And she has been consistent. I mean, her career spans over decades. And if anything, she has been, I think, a pillar of ethical journalism. And you have now this 59-year-old grandmother, African-American, coming to America, being arrested because apparently she poses a threat to national security or to the integrity of the United States of America. That makes no sense whatsoever.
As Catherine says later in this message, which is available on her YouTube site, this is an example of our government attempting to police thought.
The point is that she's a journalist. The point is that she was robbed of her freedom because she holds views that are not considered illegal in America. But you cannot police thoughts. You cannot police ideology. You cannot arrest people because you feel that somehow the critique of your regime or your policy or your behaviors is bothering you to the point where you would like to silence them, and if need be, at the barrel of a gun. We can't do this. Otherwise, we might as well not call ourselves a democracy. So I live in the UK, where, thank God, we still have something called free expression. Thank God, our government, not yet anyway, is not trampling over our civil liberties. But the United States of America has become a buffoon, of a democratic devolution. I mean, what is it left to say of this bastion of liberty we have been told is actually trying to export and promote democracy, across the world, to the barrel of a gun, by the way, by using extreme force, military force, when it's arresting its own nationals and violating their own national civil liberties.
The latest on the case as we record this podcast is that the family has released a statement saying an order by the Chief Judge of the District Court for the District of Columbia clearly states that, quote, Ms. Hashemi is not accused of any crime and has cooperated with the judicial proceedings, and as to the fact that she does not pose a flight risk, which was the basis for her arrest under the material witness law, and that therefore there is no longer a need for her continued incarceration. End quote. Her son, however, says it's unlikely she will be released soon. Reuters quotes an unnamed U.S. government source as claiming that a grand jury was examining whether Press TV is a propaganda outlet that failed to register as an agent of a foreign government. Why does our government so despise the government and people of Iran? Here's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking in Cairo on January 10th. First listen as he lies about the history of the Iranian Revolution.
America's reluctance, our reluctance to wield our influence kept us silent as the people of Iran rose up against the mullahs in Tehran in the Green Revolution. The Ayatollahs and their henchmen murdered, jailed, and intimidated freedom-loving Iranians. And they wrongly blamed America for this unrest when it was their own tyranny that had fueled it.
Pompeo seems to forget or ignore the fact that the US and the UK overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953 and installed the brutal Shah Reza Pahlavi, who instituted a reign of terror that lasted until the revolution forced the Shah to flee in January 1979. He continues by touting U.S. efforts to assist the Saudi aggression against Yemen, and even claims to be on the side of peace by doing so.
In Yemen, we've assisted our coalition partners as they take the lead in preventing an Iranian expansion that would be disastrous for world trade and regional security. As is always the case with America, our engagement has also been coupled with robust humanitarian aid. We've supported the UN talks to put Yemen on the path to peace.
On a recent episode of this program, Catherine Shakdam laid waste to these arguments.
This animosity against Iran is actually, has only one purpose and one purpose alone, is that to please Israel. And if we were to put it in that, kind of narrative, then maybe we could have a real discussion on whether we should or shouldn't, be aggressive towards Iran, because really we're talking about Israel national security. But even if you look at it from this perspective, Iran doesn't want to declare war on Israel. It could have. It could still, but it doesn't, and it didn't. So it didn't for many great years. Why would it start now? Iran has been around for almost 40 years now, and it hasn't declared war on Israel when it could have done so for, many, many years ago for many great reasons on many occasions, and it didn't. So, we need to be a little bit more rational about what Iran actually wants to do. It hasn't done it when it was in Syria, helping to fight ISIS militants, and it was literally next door to Israel. It didn't do anything. Why would it do it now? It makes no sense other than this, this ridiculous fear that the Israelis are holding over all of our heads, saying that Iran is very, very bad. We don't know why, and we don't actually know how it is very bad, but we have to say that, yes, it is very, very bad. I don't think it is, personally, because they haven't shown us anything bad other than that they are a country who wish, like every other country in the world, to expand their influence and kind of promote their way of thinking. But this is what any country wants to do anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think there are other ways to reduce the influence of Iran if people think it's that bad. We don't have to use the military. We don't have to use sanctions all the time. It's actually counterintuitive and counterproductive. What we should do is try to understand and maybe, try to not radicalize people's way of thinking by isolating them. What about trying to understand them?
Well, that would make a lot of sense.
It would.
I think one of the things too. Iran is constantly. When we talk about the Saudi war on Yemen, we're constantly reminded, every single article I read says the Iran-backed Houthis.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Let me cut you here, because it infuriates me so much. Where is Iran in Yemen? I'm not saying that. I'm not against someone making the case for Iran's influence in Yemen. Why not? If someone has an argument, let's make it. But there is not one Iranian troop in Yemen. There is no actually proof, and I'm talking about real proof, not cartoons at the United Nations, real proof of Iran sending money, sending weapons, sending troops, sending food, sending anything. There is actually no proof whatsoever. If so, I promise you it would have been everywhere all the time.
As Catherine says, the real reason for our enmity with Iran has to do with Israel. The fact that Iran is seen as a threat by the Israeli government. For more background on the ill will between Israel and Iran, I spoke to my friend Dr. Jack Dresser. Jack is the co-director of the Al-Nakba Awareness Project and national vice chair of the Palestine and Middle East Working Group of Veterans for Peace. I started by asking Jack why Israel believes that Iran poses an existential threat to them.
What Israel believes, I assume you're referring to the leadership of Israel, and let's differentiate that from the Israeli population. The Israeli population acts as if they actually believe what their leadership tells them. Mm-hmm. They seem to reflect the hysteria about Iran and especially the religious fanaticism directed toward Iran, the fantasy that somehow Iran is going to attack them and potentially destroy them, because Israel, of course, is a very small country. They're constantly emphasizing that we're just a small country and we're surrounded by enemies and so forth. The fact is, of course, that there's no chance whatsoever of Iran attacking Israel or even threatening Israel in any serious way. And their own military knows that. And the Mossad knows that, and Shin Bet knows that. They know perfectly well that if Iran were to attack Israel, Iran would be immediately destroyed. And Iran knows that. So there's no chance in the world that Iran would ever attack Israel. And Iran, is not an aggressive nation. Iran has not invaded any other nation in somewhere around 200 years. And of course, they're also accused of sponsoring terrorism. Well, what they sponsor is, they don't really sponsor, they do support Hezbollah in Lebanon, and to a lesser extent, Hamas in Gaza. There's very little that can get into Gaza. Mm-hmm. So the main issue is Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, is demonized right along with Iran by the American press, the American media. They're always referred to as a terrorist organization. They, in fact, are a primary political party within Lebanon, and they do have a military wing. And they arose in 1982 in response to Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon. And they arose as a force to stop Israeli aggression in their own country and eventually to expel the Israeli occupiers. It took them 18 years to get that done, but in 2000, they were able to get Israel out of there. And Israel attacked Lebanon again in 2006, and Hezbollah very effectively defeated them and drove them out. So Hezbollah is not an aggressive threat to Israel unless Israel attacked Iran, and that's the key, because Hezbollah, it's estimated now, has somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 missiles and rockets, and they are an ally of Iran. And if Israel attacked Iran, it's very likely that they would rain missiles that will reach every Israeli city and would absolutely create havoc. And even before Hezbollah had these weapons, they still defeated Israel in 2006 because they have dug-in defenses and they have very motivated soldiers that are not going to fold up. They're defending their own country against invaders, unlike Israel, which is always invading other people. And Israel has never actually had to defend their own country. That's another one of Israel's favorite myths, that they've been attacked. They have never been attacked. In 1948, their Great War of Independence was actually conducted against helpless Palestinians who had been disarmed by the British. And the Arab forces that eventually intervened after May 1948, when Israel had already expelled about a third of the Palestinian population through terrorism and ethnic cleansing, the armies that invaded from Iraq and Egypt and Syria only were trying to protect the areas of Palestine that had been designated for Arabs by UN Resolution 181. Mm-hmm. And they succeeded in saving about half of it. Israel would have taken the whole thing. The UN Resolution 181 had designated 45% of Palestine for the Arab population. And they ended up with 22%, almost exactly half. And that's all they were there to do, was to protect the part that was designated for Arabs. And they're also accused of threatening Israel in 1967. That was a complete lie. And Menachem Begin admitted that in 1982 in a speech before the American War College. He said, well, we have to be honest. We decided to attack them. And Madi Valed, the IDF general at the time, was highly insulted that Israel was claiming they were threatened by these Arab armies, because the Arab armies were no match whatsoever and were not prepared for any kind of a defensive, much less offensive warfare. So then in 1973, supposedly Israel was attacked again. Well, where did those battles take place that they like to talk about? Well, they took place in the Sinai and they took place in the Golan Heights, neither of which are part of Israel. The Egyptian and Syrian armies are simply trying to regain the land that had been stolen from them in 1967. So no Arab army has ever threatened the internationally recognized borders of Israel.
Even if we assume that Israel might be under threat from a better armed and experienced Hezbollah force in Lebanon, should they attempt to invade Lebanon again, it is quite a stretch to claim that the U.S. is under threat from Iran or Hezbollah. I asked Jack then, why is U.S. policy bound by what Israel thinks it wants or needs?
Wants, not needs.
Wants, yes.
Wants, yes. Well, there's two things. One, the most important thing is the Israel lobby. You know, the Zionist forces in the United States love to proclaim that Israel's interests are tied in very tightly with U.S. interests, and people like Stephen Zunis even claim that the United States is just using Israel as a forward operating base, and is even anti-Semitic in doing so, just putting the poor Jewish state at risk. If Israel is so necessary to American interests in the Middle East, why do they need to maintain a massive lobby? Why do they need to maintain what is considered always among the top 2 or 3 lobbies in the United States that have the greatest influence out of like 400 K Street lobbies? Israel is always at the top. They are even referred to in Washington as the lobby. They are smothering, they are everywhere, and it's not only in Washington. They're at every state level, every local level. They're watching everything that goes on in American politics and interfering continuously in American politics. A previous gubernatorial candidate we had here in Oregon told me that when he filed for candidacy for the governor's office, he was contacted immediately, like the next day, by the Israel lobby in Seattle, asking where he stood on Israel. The stories are legendary from Cynthia McKinney and Paul Findlay and James Aberett's number of American political leaders in Congress whose careers have been ended because they spoke out against Israel. And there's a very interesting YouTube video by Cynthia McKinney I would advise listeners to look up, where she talks about how the lobby worked with her, they finally did defeat her simply by gerrymandering. But her father asked her when she reported this activity of the lobby trying to basically extort support by withholding any campaign funds and directing their campaign funds to the opponent's campaign. That's the way they operate. He said, now, what in the world is of any interest to the residents of Stone Mountain, Georgia? What interest do they have in Israel? You know, and that's exactly what all Americans need to asking. What is our interest in Israel? Why are we giving this kind of money to Israel?
There is another reason why Iran is viewed as a threat by the U.S., however, Jack explains.
The element of power has to do not with military power. It has to do with Iran's potential political power in the region, that Iran is not only the physically largest, most populous, but the most stable and stabilizing influence in the region, also the most cohesive nation in the region. The Iranians are quite proud, and they're a creative nation, a stable nation, and whatever issues they have with the Iranian religious patrols, they will work out on their own without any help from us.
As Jack says, the Iranians, like the people of every other sovereign nation, should be given the right to work out their own problems without the interference of the United States. I want to end this broadcast with a matter that's closer to home. A good friend of mine was asked to speak on the podium at the local Women's March this weekend. She began her remarks, but midway through, the march organizers cut off her microphone and informed her that her speech was divisive. Marzieh is a longtime activist in this community and has been a vocal advocate for the cause of Palestinian human rights for many years. Let's hear Marzieh speaking to the Eugene Women's March on January 19th.
Everyone participating today represents a thread in a tapestry, a piece of the mosaic, and has something to contribute to a growing movement. For me, I'm here to resist. As a parent, I'm here to resist the detention, torture, maiming, and use of Palestinian children for target practice by Israeli occupation forces. I'm here to resist the tax dollars and UN diplomatic support we have given to Israel for decades, providing it impunity from international law and their disregard for human life. I'm here to resist Israel's collaboration with the Mexican border wall that cuts through indigenous lands. I'm here to resist Zionist racism that sees Palestinians, including refugees, as a, quote, demographic threat. I'm here to resist the ADL and JINSA's sponsorship of Israeli training of U.S. police in surveillance and so-called anti-terrorism techniques for use against Muslim, Black, immigrant, and other devalued populations. Did you know that Portland Police Chief Danielle Outlaw participated in one of these trainings last July, and that Israel trains ICE? The organization RAIA, researching the American and Israeli alliance, along with Jewish Voice for Peace, keeps track of this in their online Deadly Exchange report. I'm here to resist the Israel Bloc Party celebration that has taken place the past 2 years at the UO underneath the 9 flags of Oregon's tribal nations. Thankfully, we now commemorate Indigenous Peoples Day rather than Columbus Day. Because Columbus Day represented the brutal, genocidal ethnic cleansing of the Americas. We shouldn't commemorate Israel's ethnic cleansing either. Might not Palestinian and Lebanese, Arab and Muslims seeing Israel's flag feel the same as blacks seeing the Confederate flag, or Jews seeing the Nazi party flag? I'm here to resist both state and federal anti-BDS legislation and Israeli-centric Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, both of which the ACLU opposes. I'm here to resist, but also to suggest a way forward, not only to challenge political Zionism and all forms of institutionalized racism, all forms of bigotry, but also to create a vision of freedom, justice, and equality. And I'm asking you to do the same. If you are Muslim, consider joining Al-Auda and American Muslims for Palestine. If you are Jewish, consider joining Jews for Palestinian Right of Return and Jewish Voice for Peace, both endorsing the full nonviolent resistance tactics and goals of the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment.
Her mic was cut off just there as she was saying the words boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The organizers started yelling, "We need to save humanity," or some such nonsense, as though the Palestinian people were not part of humanity. Marzieh agreed to read the rest of her speech for this program.
If you are Jewish, consider joining Jews for Palestinian Right of Return and Jewish Voice for Peace, both endorsing the full nonviolent resistance tactics and goals of the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement to help decolonize Palestine. If you are also Israeli, consider supporting Zohor, Who Profits, Boycott from Within, and Coalition of Women for Peace that works to end the militarization of society for equality, inclusion, justice for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and to ensure the right of return for the Palestinian refugees. I'm asking that we all endorse the full Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because human rights are for everyone. Everyone. I hope everyone deeply understands the intersectionality of oppression and stands up for and supports each other. As Ahed Tamimi says, we should extend our struggles to one another in order to end all of the world's injustices. Thank you.
And thank you, Marzieh. I want to take this opportunity to reflect on what's happened to activism in this country, particularly since the election of Donald Trump. A great deal of activism, although organized around a number of approved causes, is really designed for only two purposes. The first is virtue signaling. As Wikipedia describes it, virtue signaling is the public expression of opinions that show one's own good character or moral correctness. People want to show that they're part of the resistance, that they're opposed to the border wall, police brutality, or whatever other causes are generally championed on TV and social media. The second reason is to promote the Democratic Party. When a rally is organized by the Democratic Party itself, or one of the many fake progressive organizations that act as proxies for the party, such as Move On or Indivisible, you can be quite sure that only those causes that the party bosses feel comfortable about are going to be on the agenda. The recent women's marches around the nation are an excellent example. Here's a march that began 2 years ago to protest the outcome of the election. It did not protest the neoliberal policies of the Democratic Party that kept working Americans teetering precariously barely above the poverty line. It did not protest the neoconservative policies of the Democratic Party that waste $1 trillion a year on a military and intervene all over the world, destroying the lives of tens of thousands of people, particularly in Yemen, Syria, and Libya recently. It did not protest the stupidity of the Democratic Party leadership that campaigned badly on the idea that everything in America was peachy keen and we should stay the course. Democrats of whatever gender need to stop falling into the trap of identity politics and start looking at the bigger picture. Look at who's winning and who's losing in this country and why. Look at the hundreds of U.S. military bases around the world and our nation's constant interference in the affairs of other nations and our utter destruction of a number of nations in the name of democracy. Understanding the pernicious and murderous nature of the Zionist regime in historic Palestine and our nation's responsibility for that ethnic cleansing is part of that as well. Well, that's all I have for the program this week. If you have comments or questions about the program, email me at widerviewradio@gmail.com or comment on our Facebook page at Wider View Radio. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway. Thanks for listening.